So I'm going to wait about another 30 seconds until we start. We can start right at 5. Well, the clock just turned 5, so we can now begin. So again, you are in the session 1 room. If you would like to switch to session 2, there is a link in the chat, or you can use the QR code. And as a reminder, please hold your questions until the end if you're going to put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand during the question time and I will call on you. So first up, we have Caitlin Drasher. Caitlin is a second-year master's student in Jed Murdoch's lab. She also did her undergrad in Rubenstein studying wildlife biology. She spent 2 years working as a wildlife technician for state agencies in the Northeast, assisting with black bear and bobcat research projects and mitigating human-wildlife conflict. Her current research relates to landscape connectivity and road ecology. Specifically, she is trying to figure out where different wildlife species are most likely to cross the road so that we can improve our transportation infrastructure to be more wildlife friendly. Caitlin is from Manchester, Vermont, and in her free time enjoys skiing, hiking, kayaking, and wildlife watching. And again, Caitlin, I will give you your 5-minute, 2-minute warnings, and your final time is up in the chat, so look out for that. And if you go over, I will unmute myself and let you know. All right, please help me welcome Caitlin.
Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, I'm Caitlin. I'm working with Jed Murdoch, and we're using electrical circuit analysis to measure and map wildlife connectivity across transportation networks in Vermont. Our project is funded by the Vermont Agency of Transportation, also known as VTrans, and is in collaboration with the Nature Conservancy in Vermont, the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, and the Rubenstein School. And as Lucy said, our ultimate goal is to figure out which of our transportation structures, so culverts, bridges, and underpasses, are most important for landscape connectivity and wildlife movement across roads. Next slide. So I wanted to start with some background on roads and wildlife. Roads have significant impacts on wildlife populations. They obviously contribute to direct mortality through wildlife vehicle collisions, but they also lead to some indirect mortality due to their effects relating to wildlife habitat. So roads fragment habitat, they divide up the landscape and prevent some species from accessing important resources. They also impede dispersal and decrease genetic exchange between subpopulations. And over time, this can lead to less viable populations and less genetic resilience. And roads may also get in the way of populations that are undergoing range shifts in response to climate change. So terrestrial species will need to physically cross roadways as they shift their ranges along with those habitats that they depend on. Vermont is 78% forested, although we are not exempt from the effects of habitat fragmentation by roads. We have over 25,000 kilometers of roadway in Vermont, which really divides up our wildlife habitat into smaller, disconnected patches. And our road network does include over 88,000 state-managed transportation structures, but only around 6,000 of these are large enough to potentially facilitate wildlife passage. So those are the ones that we're focusing on with my project. Next slide. So one way that we can mitigate these barrier effects that roads present is to make them more permeable for wildlife with crossing structures. And thankfully, transportation networks have this existing infrastructure that's already serving this purpose or can be modified to better serve this purpose. That being said, it's very expensive to create new infrastructure or even just to update our existing infrastructure to make roads more wildlife friendly. So unfortunately, we're not getting any of those cool grassy wildlife overpasses that Canada has. But VTrans does want a way of determining which ones of our existing transportation structures are most important for wildlife movement. And that way, our limited resources can be spent more effectively by improving the ones that are found in these important movement areas for different wildlife species. And the goal of those improvements will be to make the structures more usable and appealing, so wildlife will want to cross beneath the road rather than over the road. But the goal of my research is to first rank all of our state-managed transportation structures according to their connectivity value for terrestrial mammals in Vermont. And we're focusing on 8 species that are listed here. These are larger bodied mammals that are more wide ranging, and they often cross roadways in Vermont. And the example I go through today for this presentation is using data for American marten. So we were able to get some existing data that was ready to go for a test run. So this is sort of the bonus species that we're focusing on today. Next slide. We're using a multi-scale approach for this analysis. So the first part takes place at the scale of the entire Vermont landscape, where we'll model wildlife movement based on species occurrence data and landscape features. The second step involves modeling wildlife movement in a fixed radius around each individual structure. And here we're using more detailed land cover data and species occurrence data. And the third step is where we combine results from both this landscape scale and this structure scale to get a single ranking of our structures based on their connectivity value in both of these steps. Next slide. We're using circuit theory to model wildlife movement in Vermont, and this method treats the movement of animals just like the flow of electricity through a circuit. So this circuit consists of different resistances, which channels the flow of electricity or wildlife through less resistant paths in the landscape. And our Vermont circuit is made up of forest areas, agriculture, residential neighborhoods, roadways, and a bunch of other features. And each one of these will have their own resistance value assigned for different Vermont wildlife species. So for example, American marten, they're a very forest-dependent species. They move very easily through forested areas. So the canopy cover class would have a low resistance to movement. On the other hand, areas of high human development or open fields, things like that, would have higher resistances to movement for this species. And we're using a program called Omniscape to model the movements of each one of our focal species. Next slide. So this is our step one. This takes place at the landscape scale. And we have two inputs here, and the output will tell us where wildlife are most likely to move. And again, these are maps just for American marten. So our first input tells us how much marten electricity is coming out of the landscape and where it's coming from. And we'll be using species occurrence data or occupancy data, which tells us the probability that marten occur in each pixel of the landscape. Our second input in the middle tells us how resistant different parts of the landscape are, which then determines how that electricity flows throughout the landscape. So for marten in this step one, we used genetic data that was converted into a resistance map. For our other species, we'll be using expert opinion data. But this resistance map just tells us how easy or how difficult it is for marten to move through different land cover types. And so the Omniscape program is basically just stacking that resistance map on top of the occurrence map. And the occurrence map is injecting marten electricity up into the resistance map, and the marten then travel throughout the landscape in areas that there's less resistance. So the output on the right shows us a map of current density. Areas of higher current density are places that we would expect more dispersing marten, and areas with low current density are places that we would expect less dispersing marten. Next slide. So with this output map shown on the left, we can get a preliminary ranking of our structures just at this landscape scale. So for each one of the structures, we took the mean current density in a fixed radius of the location, and we then ranked them from the highest mean current density to the lowest. And so this map is just showing the top 100 structures important for marten connectivity at the landscape scale. And another thing we did at this scale was classify the different types of current density from that purple and yellow map into some more descriptive categories. So this is a normalized current map. And this allows us to better interpret the areas that are impeding movement, areas that are allowing unrestricted movement, and which areas are acting as pinch points. And this map will get used toward the end when we combine the two scales together. Next slide. So this is our step two, and here we do the same analysis that we did at the landscape scale, but in a smaller radius around each structure and with more detailed data. So we still have our source and our occupancy input on the left that's telling us how much marten electricity is coming out of each pixel. And we have our resistance input in the middle. At this scale, we're now using really detailed half-meter LiDAR data that was produced by the Spatial Analysis Lab. And so we have a new data set, and we're using expert opinion to assign resistance values to each one of these land cover types. And we just run Omniscape again for each structure, and we rank them at this fine scale from highest current density to lowest. And yeah, next slide. This leads us into step 3. So we have these rankings for the landscape scale and the structure scale, and we need a way to combine the two together to get a single ranking. So it's important to consider both of these scales, since a landscape scale ranking might not match up with what we see at the structure scale and vice versa. So in this example, you can see we have a structure that would rank pretty high if we only looked at that step 2 ranking. Since there's a lot of forested land cover around it, we know marten are a very forest dependent species. This would have a pretty high current density, mean current density value. But if we look at the step 1 ranking, and you can see the structure's location in that map on the right, we would see that this one is not very important for marten connectivity based on the landscape level movements of the species in Vermont. Next slide. Oh, next slide, Kenna. There we go. Same thing here. Oh, this is just another example going in the opposite direction. So this structure would rank pretty high at the landscape scale. You can see up in the upper right corner of the state, but it'd be ranking pretty low at the structure scale with all of that developed land cover. So again, we need a way of combining these two scales to get one final ranking. Next slide. We are exploring 4 different ways to combine these two scales. So one is to just multiply the mean current density from that statewide scale by the mean current density of the structure scale. Our second option is similar, but we would use a weighting system with those 4 current density classifications. So we would assign a weight to each one of those 4 classes based on how well they facilitate movement. And we would then multiply that weight by the structure scale current density average. A third option is to take the current density value found at the statewide scale and actually plug it in as an input for the structure scale model, so using it as that source of electricity. And the fourth option is a Bayesian approach. So we'll test all 4 of these ranking methods against camera data. We have a bunch of transportation structures that have game cameras at them, and against roadkill data to see how well our current density predictions and rankings match up with areas that have higher roadkill and wildlife use. Next slide. So some implications, as I mentioned, it's very expensive to work on these structures. So this list of rankings can be referenced whenever there is a construction project planned for a certain structure. And road managers can decide whether or not adding some wildlife friendly features would actually be worthwhile in that location, or if the funds would be better spent in a different location. And this is also pretty cost effective analysis. So we're using a combination of existing wildlife data and expert opinion data. And we can run this analysis in a pretty short amount of time for a lot of different species. This Omniscape program allows us to visualize wildlife movement over large areas. So we're doing the entire state of Vermont, and we don't need to buy any expensive GPS collars or invest a lot of time and energy into capturing animals and monitoring their movements that way. And next slide, that's all I have. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Caitlin. And thank you for staying so punctual with time.
Well, I wasn't even looking at the chat, so I was hoping that I was on time.
You have like 10 seconds left, so this is
perfect.
So we have 3 minutes for questions. If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand. You can also just type your question into the chat. And yeah, let's give it up for Caitlin as well.
Thanks.
Breck Bowden has a question.
Okay, great.
Hi, Caitlin. Nice presentation, and it really sounds like a cool project. I'm curious, it seems to me that occurrence and resistance are both being defined by landscape characteristics, or resistance is defined by landscape characteristics, but occupants, or kind of where the organism lives, is also a landscape-driven sort of characteristic. So they're correlated. And so do you need to pull those apart? Is that important, and do you need to pull it apart?
Yeah, very good question. So they're going to be developed in slightly different ways. The occurrence data we're actually getting from Skye Pierman-Gilman's research. She made a bunch of occupancy maps for all of these species in the Northeast through her own expert opinion survey. And yes, that is related to these landscape features. One thing to keep in mind with this that I sometimes struggle to keep in mind is that this occupancy data and the movement data that results from those resistance layers are 2 different things. So the occupancy data is telling us like where those species are most likely to be found in the landscape, but not necessarily how they're moving about the landscape. So when we're, putting that electricity into the landscape and then it's traveling based on how resistant the landscape features are, it's just a little bit different of a relationship when you're looking at movement versus occurrence, if that makes sense. I hope I answered that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Great question. We have about 40 seconds. If anybody else has a question they would like to ask. Yes, Nancy, please.
Oh, very quick, Caitlin. As a behaviorist, I would love to hear your thoughts about how these corridors are either used or avoided by, and I'm thinking of the carnivores in particular, between the interactions between coyotes and fox, for example. What do you see along these lines, and could they be avoided, and is there any potential problem with that?
Could the corridors be avoided?
Yeah, because of predation or of from an animal behavior standpoint.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see when we actually run these species-specific models. We haven't gotten that far yet. We've only run the one for American marten, but it will be interesting to see how those corridors for predatory species versus prey species compare with one another. I know there's been some research out west with game camera data in different crossing structures, and some studies have found that certain species will avoid it when there's predators around, and other studies have found that there's not much of an effect. So yeah, I'll be curious to see. Once we do run all these models, I'll let you know.
Sounds good. Thanks. I keep thinking of the wolf pack territories and what these look like. So very fun. Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
All right. Unfortunately, I do see a hand, but we are out of time for questions. So this is a reminder that, well, first let's thank Caitlin again. And I forgot to say that Caitlin, I asked all of our presenters, they could be an animal for a day. What would they be? And Caitlin chose a bear, so she could eat a bunch of food and relax. So thanks again, Caitlin, for your research, and keep us updated as it moves along. If you would like to switch into session 2, there is a link in the chat where you can do so. You can also use the QR code. So if you're staying here, we will assume you are here for our next presenter. And as a reminder, this is being recorded. All right. So next up is Emma Esterbrook. Emma is a second-year master's graduate student where she enjoys working at the intersection of geospatial technologies and environmental problem solving. Her research is focused, and if you don't mind, if you're not speaking, if you could please mute yourself, that would be great. Thank you. Her research is focused on using terrestrial and airborne LiDAR data sets to locate and estimate gully erosion from road drainage outfalls at multiple temporal scales. Before starting graduate school, Emma led UVM's Spatial Analysis Lab's Unmanned Aircraft Systems team, where she led drone mapping projects, managed a team of undergraduate students, and developed educational programs relating to UAS. Emma is also a graduate of Resner's undergraduate program, where she focused on geospatial technologies and soil science. And if Emma could spend the day as any animal, she would be her dog so that she could enjoy naps, snacks, and running around outside. So please help me welcome Emma. And again, Emma, if you want, throughout your presentation, keeping the chat open, I will tell you when you have 5 minutes, 2 minutes, and your time is up.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the intro. Hi, everyone. You can go to the next slide, Kenna. So my thesis is part of a 2-year research study for the Vermont Agency of Transportation. And this project really provided an outline for my thesis goals and research questions. And the main motivation for the VTrans project really lies in the phosphorus total maximum daily load for the Vermont segments of Lake Champlain. For folks that live in Burlington, you may be aware of some of the algae blooms during the summer, which is related to the phosphorus issues of the lake. And as part of the TMDL, each state agency sector is required to meet certain reduction targets for phosphorus. And unfortunately, the state does not currently have a way to really quantify these reductions for road drainage outfalls. And the central goal for this project is to quantify rates of erosion and phosphorus at road outfall sites, and also to measure the effectiveness of erosion control measures. The study will identify water quality impacts for Vermont's roads and also to quantify potential gains that can be achieved by erosion best management practices. Next slide. And this research is also important within academia. Through my literature review, I found that while gully erosion has been studied in many areas in the world, the monitoring of the temporal and spatial erosional processes related to culverts is really quite rare. Gully erosion is often overlooked, but sediment deposition via gully erosion can comprise of a large portion of a watershed sediment budget. Research in Vermont has also highlighted the importance of identifying severe erosion associated with road networks. So further investigations are needed to understand the magnitude and impacts of outfall erosion from Vermont's roads. And my thesis will build on this previous work to address these gaps in knowledge. Next slide. So that's led me to my research goal, which is to quantify rates of gully erosion from Vermont's transportation drainage networks at multiple temporal scales. And specifically, I'm interested in rates of erosion at the event, seasonal, and annual timescales. Next slide. So to estimate gully erosion at multiple temporal scales, I will be utilizing two different approaches to estimate the erosion rates. The first is using high-resolution surveys over a 2-year period where I monitor a selection of sites seasonally and after large storm events. And to evaluate longer-term erosion rates of gullies, I will use a coarser approach that draws on high-resolution topographic data that's more widely available and covers a longer time interval than my field surveys will allow. And for that, I'll be using the airborne LiDAR data. Next slide. So for my high resolution survey sites, I have selected 13 road drainage sites in Vermont to survey. And these sites range from being on Interstate I-89 to Class 4 roads that are minimally maintained and traveled on. These sites also range in being on closed or open drainage systems. And I've surveyed these sites at least 3 times since fall of 2019. But I have selected a handful of sites that I'm surveying more frequently to monitor change at the event timescale. I also want to note that these sites are part of the V-Trans study, and some of them have had erosion mitigation installed this summer, which I marked as an asterisk. I'm not going into too much detail during this presentation, but I just wanted to make note that some of them do have erosion mitigation installed. Next slide. So this is just a map of where my survey sites are. They are mostly located within Chittenden County, but our furthest sites are located in Stowe and Johnson, which are about an hour away from Burlington. I selected these sites based on driving distance from Burlington, accessibility, and feasibility to survey. Next slide. So going into the approach of how I survey these sites, I am using the engineering department's terrestrial LiDAR scanner, which we can see on the image to the left. This unit is on a tripod, and it collects a panoramic 3D scan of an area. At most of our sites, we have to do 3 to 5 scan locations, so we're pretty much physically moving the scanner around the gully so we can make sure we get full data coverage of a site. And the initial output of this is a 3D point cloud, which can then be brought into geospatial software. And then the image on the right is one of our survey sites. I just wanted to show an example of that and also a general idea of scale for about how large they are. There's a person in the upper right-hand corner of that image. Next slide. So for our preliminary results, after a survey, I process the 3D point cloud from the scanner, and I remove buildings and vegetation from the data set, with the resulting data set being a digital elevation model, which is what we see on the screen here. A digital elevation model is a geospatial model that's a representation of the bare earth. And this can then be used for volume estimations and other geoprocessing. All of my surveys are georeferenced to one another, so I can make accurate estimations of volume change over time. Next slide. So these are preliminary results of our surveys. This is a site located on Elm Street in Winooski and then Young Street in Colchester. And for the most part, we're seeing volumes of gullies increase over time with each of our surveys. There are a couple outliers where in some of our surveys, the volume of the gully will decrease slightly, and we're assuming some deposition occurs there. But for the most part, we are seeing gully volume increase over time, so they are eroding away. Next slide. And this is just two other sites that we're working on. These are two sites on I-89 in Colchester. And again, we're seeing the volume of gully increase over time. And the units on the y-axis are in cubic meter. I also want to note that I also estimated the volumes of gullies using the 2016 airborne LiDAR data set, which is like the first unit on these graphs. So there's about a 3-year time difference between the first and second data. Next slide. And then moving on to the assessment of gully using airborne LiDAR. This approach really has two overarching objectives. The first is to locate culvert drainage locations that have evidence of gully erosion. And the second is to actually estimate the gully change between these two LiDAR data sets. To locate evidence of gully erosion, I'm using two culvert geospatial data sets. The first is the small culvert inventory that's downloaded by VCGI, and this includes state roads, and then VT culverts, which is where towns can upload their culvert data, so it includes town roads. And what these data sets are just point locations of culvert data of where their culverts are on the road. And my sampling plan for this side of the project is to select towns that have representative hill slope and road grade values to the statewide data set. To locate gully erosion, I'm going through each of these points overlaid with statewide LiDAR data and marking points that have evidence of gully erosion. And an example of what kind of evidence of gully erosion looks like are on the images to the right here. Next slide, please. And then to estimate gully change over time, we are utilizing two different time periods to compare change. The first data set that I'm using is the quality level 2 LiDAR data set, which was used to locate the evidence of gully erosion. This data set has statewide coverage, and it was collected between 2013 and 2017. I'm then comparing that data set with the quality level 3 LiDAR data set. This data has variable coverage, and it was collected on different years ranging from 2005 to 2012. And the purple index in the map shown here is the extent of the quality level 3 data set. So we're a little limited with the data we have available. We can only compare the gully change in areas that have two time periods to compare. Next slide, please. So these are my very early preliminary results of the airborne LiDAR work. And I have been working with a group of 6 undergraduates this semester that have helped assist me with the airborne LiDAR dataset. And I wouldn't have been able to do this part of the work without their assistance. And as a group, we have assessed about 9,500 culverts throughout the semester. And of those, we have marked about 1,300 of them that have some evidence of gully erosion. And we're still working on estimating some of the volume change of the gullies. Next slide. So my next steps include an accuracy assessment to ground truth the airborne LiDAR work. And I also plan to begin the statistical analysis of my airborne LiDAR and survey data sets. Specifically, I'm interested in looking at how rainfall, hill slope, soil properties, and road grade influence gully erosion. And lastly, I also need to estimate the volumes of gullies from our late summer and fall surveys. Thank you very much, and I would be happy to answer any questions y'all have.
Thank you, Emma. Let's give it up for Emma. I'm loving how absolutely punctual we are. So yeah, if you have any questions for Emma, feel free to raise your hand, or you can type your question, and we have 3 minutes for questions.
I just want to jump in real quick to say that there does seem to be a little bit of lag on my side. So when I'm hitting the button, it's taking about like a couple seconds for it to change. So just presenters, be aware of that.
Thank you.
Yes, Breck, please go for it.
Hey, Emma, really cool project. So it is a part of your plan. I see on this slide here that your next steps are to try to develop a predictive model at some point.
So I'm interested in looking at how certain variables influence gully erosion. I don't necessarily have plans to have predictive power. The main thing I'm interested in is trying to understand just the magnitude of gully erosion within the state. So I guess trying to get a sense of like how big of a problem it is for Vermont, and if VTrans should even care about gully erosion.
Right. Okay. And so like what factor might be most important, whether it was slope or soil type or something like that? Is that something that you might be able to do?
Yeah, exactly. That's my next step for the statistical side.
And I am just curious about whether you felt that you could automatically identify gullies without knowing where the culvert was.
So I am using the culvert points to identify gullies from culverts. I think if we didn't have that point data set, it would be extremely difficult / impossible to do this work on the remote side. You'd probably have to actually like drive down a road and actually, find a culvert, then see if there's a gully associated to it.
Okay. I asked because your gullies look very much like thermokarst features in the Alaskan permafrost. And we've been wondering how we could identify those automatically because we don't have the benefit of a gully, of a culvert, target that we could use as a way to try to identify it. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. I think that is possible, but that would be a modeling endeavor that would be quite intensive, I would think.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Any other brief questions for Emma? All right, well, Emma, well done. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this is a reminder that if you would like to switch to session 2, you can click the link that is about to be dropped in the chat or use the QR code. If you do stay here, we assume you are staying for the next presenter. The link is now in the chat again. Moving right along, I keep forgetting to introduce myself. Sorry about that. So my name is Lucy Drummond, and I am a first-year PhD student in Rubenstein. I'm looking at waste and discarding materials, material analysis, labor, supply chains, and who knows what else yet so far. And I'm working with Adrian Avakiv. So, all right. Next we have Marcus. And all right, so Marcus was born and raised on the West Coast in Sunnyvale, California, by 2 hippie exiles native to conservative Ohio. He was raised as a die-hard blue-collar American and found his way into the Navy, where he discovered his calling to help our nation better manage access to natural resources. Specifically, resources like water and its constituents, specifically stormwater in urban green infrastructure. If he could be any animal for a day, Marcus would be a red-tailed hawk because this animal is his spirit guardian. Please help me welcome Marcus.
Thank you, Lucy. Well said. Chloride and phosphorus performance in urban green stormwater infrastructure. Chloride is becoming a very big topic in stormwater around here, specifically in urban areas, just because there's a lot more impervious surface that is going to be spread with salts. And phosphorus has been a long time constituent. And I'm looking at how the green stormwater infrastructure, how they control, sorry, a little frazzled, long day. Phosphorus performance in urban green stormwater infrastructure. How does chloride and phosphorus perform? Next slide, please. So as we know, I'm Marcos Kubo. My primary advisor is Eric Roy, and my committee members are Stephanie Hurley and Donna Rizzo. Next slide, please. As we know now, I am a veteran of the U.S. Navy, and this is where I found my calling with managing resources in the water. The Navy, much like any system, I saw a lot of waste, and so it is that experience that brought me here. Next slide, please. So on a smaller scale, we can see this algae. This isn't toxic blue-green algae or cyanobacteria, whatever you want to call it. It's just regular algae. And when we see this waste, it's because something else is available to metabolize. Things like phosphorus help metabolization of things like algae. And when you have these exponential growths of micro species, it can break down very quickly and have a equal and opposite effect on the system. And there's also a question of what is chloride doing to these systems, and how does chloride affect these microbes that are so important to green infrastructure. Next slide, please. So I'm specifically looking at gravel wetlands and are state standards being met, and is it feasible with locally sourced materials? Next slide, please. So the Vermont System Stormwater Manual has this pretty little, I would say, suggestive design. And I say suggestive because every place is different. Every individual cell of these gravel wetlands are different because it's a different topography and a different overall watershed, all these micro watersheds. Next slide, please. So I looked at hydraulic conductivity of these specific materials that we are using in gravel wetlands. And saturated hydraulic conductivity essentially says the rate of water that's moving through the soil. How fast is it going? And this number is actually within the range that's not the exact number that the soil has to be. That's just very low, close to the range of the desired hydraulic conductivity. Next slide, please. So we can see just from preliminary analysis of the materials that are being used in the area, none of them are meeting that necessary hydraulic conductivity to be considered an impermeable organic layer. Next slide, please. Okay. So water extractable phosphorus is a very common metric for urban stormwater systems. And with these mucks that are available locally, I took a volume of soil and I agitated it with water, deionized water for 1 hour. And that's considered a good metric to determine how much phosphorus is going to come out of the soil. And so by doing this preliminary analysis, we can determine, or we can speculate what we're going to see when we do our lab scale column study. Next slide, please. So when we look at the water extractable phosphorus, we see that it's within 50 milligrams muck per kilogram of muck. So these are numbers that are above what we want to see in these mucks. Like, the whole point of these systems are to absorb nutrients, but we're seeing a release, and it's above what we want to see in the manual as a standard. Next slide, please. And this is a comparison of how basically a way to look at whether water extractable P is a good metric for these mucks, as they're being called in the manual. We can see that there's a big variance in the total phosphorus here of these soils, but from year to year, these two soils right here on the left, M1 2019, M1 2020, they're pretty close relative to the closeness of the other years, and then the first year and the second year. But water extractable phosphorus seems to be a good way to measure what we can expect to see leaching from these soils. Next slide, please. So it looks like I'm running out of time, but essentially that is the data I have recovered so far on these materials. And if you go ahead to like slide 20 maybe, it'll show the diagram of the entire lab scale workflow.
So I can't see your slide numbers, but let me know if this is good or if I should back up some.
Yeah, that's a perfect place to stop. So this is where I'm at now. I am ready to start Monday. Essentially, the columns on the right represent the muck portion of of the gravel wetland. And on the left here, we have the vertical flow gravel portion to represent a horizontal subsurface flow gravel system. And we're not expecting to see a difference in the phosphorus concentrations based on what we saw, the water extractable phosphorus. But what will be interesting to see is how chloride is affecting all of this interaction, and what we can, will we expect to see the phosphorus leaching to drop off immediately, or will it continue to convert less soluble forms of phosphorus into the water? Thank you.
All right, Marcos. Well, thank you. Let's give a hand for Marcos. We have 3 minutes for questions now. So if you'd like to ask a question, you can just pop it into the chat or feel free to raise your hand. Jack, go for it.
I'll throw one in there. Marcos, really nice presentation. I am curious. You said that the mucks had a higher hydraulic conductivity than you expected. Do you have a thought at the moment about why that might be the case?
Yes. Basically, the conductivity, they're limiting these materials to, in the manual, are closer to what you would see with clay materials, like essentially an actual wetland. But it's difficult to synthesize that. And so there's been different recipes put together, but most of it is compost mixed with sand, and there's not a whole lot of very fine high surface area substrates, or at least enough, a high enough ratio within the substrate to permit these low conductivities.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great question. Any other quick questions for Marcos? Yeah, Kenna.
So Marcos, this is really cool work, and I'm wondering if you could just, like, you kind of mentioned at the end, you're interested how chloride will interact with like the phosphorus leaching. I was wondering if you could just tell us like your hypotheses, like how do you think that will impact phosphorus leaching?
Well, I mean, for starters, to break the ice with some anecdotes, you think about how useful it is on the roads. You know, if you spend a few winters here in Vermont, you can see that the sidewalks just get caked with this white layer of salt. So, I mean, if you've ever spent any time in the lab, you can understand how much effect just a small amount in water can change the chemistry within the water itself. And, you know, another thing about working in the lab is water is the master solvent. That's how you make all of your solutions. So when you throw salt in there, sodium chloride, you know, HCl, or is that technically a salt? Anyways, I just feel like it raises the pH, and it if you put a piece of metal in it, you're gonna see it rust. So I know that oxidizes water, and or that means the metal is being oxidized. So that's a rich environment for phosphorus to be attenuated, but we'll see.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kenna, for that question. Well done, Marcos. Thanks for sharing your research with us. If you would like to switch to session 2, there is the QR code, and then the link will be posted in the chat again. As a reminder, this is being recorded, and we are moving right along. So Will Suter. Will is originally from Fort Washington, PA, a small suburb outside of Philadelphia. He is a graduate of the Rubenstein School in 2017, where he completed his undergraduate degree in environmental science with a concentration in biology. Since graduation, Will has spent 2 summers on the North Slope of Alaska, assisting stream ecology research as part of the Arctic LTER. His primary scientific interests are aquatic science and studying the biogeochemical impacts of climate change. For his master's research, he will be conducting his own project on the Arctic tundra, which will focus on how rapid permafrost thaw is affecting the way in which nutrients cycle through polar stream ecosystems. If he could spend the day as any animal, Will would be a Labrador Retriever because they always find happiness in the little things. So please help me welcome Will. And Will, I will be dropping your time when you have 5 and 2 minutes and your time is up into the chat if you want to keep that open. But take it away, Will.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Will Suter, and I am a first-year master's student here in the Rubenstein School under my advisor, Breck Bowden. I'd just like to start by thanking Carolyn Goodwin-Kefner for organizing this event, along with our dean, Nancy Matthews. I'd also like to thank my advisor, Breck Bowden, Seth O'Brien, our moderator, Lucy Drummond, and Kenna Rucastle for assisting me with my slides tonight. So tonight I'm just going to be talking about iron and phosphorus cycling in a changing Arctic watershed. Next. So first I'll be giving a little background on the Arctic tundra and the 2 focal minerals in this study. Then I'll be showing you all some important figures that have influenced my thinking about this project. And lastly, I'll be covering my project and my plan for the upcoming year. Next. So let's start in the Arctic. I conduct all of my field research out of a place called Toolik Field Station, run by the University of Alaska Fairbanks. It sits approximately 200 miles above the Arctic Circle, just north of the Brooks Mountain Range and the gates of the Arctic National Park. Next. Here's a picture of the field station itself. And next.
Sorry, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and reshare. It's just the lagging is increasing over time, so just give me one.
Yeah, no problem.
I will pause your time, Will.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
All right.
Perfect.
Can you guys see that now? Okay, great.
And here is a picture of what science looks like in this remote and beautiful landscape. Next. All right, so something you may not know about the Arctic tundra is that it is currently warming at more than twice the rate of the global average. In fact, if you look at the figure in the top right, you'll see that the greatest temperature increase from the average is located above Alaska's North Slope. A consequence of this dramatic warming is the degradation and thaw of permafrost. A unique feature of the North Slope of Alaska is the presence of a continual soil ice layer, which lies beneath the surface organic soils. And as you can see in the figure on the bottom right, it affects the way that water moves through the landscape. Here in Vermont, as precipitation infiltrates the soil, it aggregates in deeper layers in the form of a water table. But on the tundra, this is not the case. Water instead moves with gravity and topography of the landscape, pooling in areas of lower elevation in the forms of lakes, rivers, and wetlands. As permafrost continues to thaw, the groundwater flow paths are deepening, and water is now interacting with previously unavailable nutrient-rich mineral soils. This increased solute load is now moving with the groundwater toward the low-lying areas across the landscape. Ken is ahead of me, but that's good. We'll just keep going. One of the solutes expected to be transported by groundwater in increasing concentrations is phosphorus. So this is important because phosphorus is the limiting nutrient within Arctic freshwater systems. And it's also a scarcely abundant element, often measured at the detection limit of our analyses, which is 0.05 micromole. Due to its scarcity, previous studies deemed that abiotic components of its cycle were negligible, and it was assumed that high competition by plants likely meant that this nutrient was quickly assimilated as soon as it became available. I've highlighted the biotic components of the cycle in the figure above, and as we're beginning to realize, the abiotic components may play a bigger role than we previously thought. Next. The second focal mineral in the study is iron. And iron cycles much differently than phosphorus, but what I want to focus on is how it cycles chemically. So iron's a transition metal, meaning it exists in different forms depending on pH and the presence of oxygen. Under anoxic acidic conditions, it exists as ferrous iron, Fe2. Under oxic acidic conditions, it exists as ferric iron, Fe3. And under oxic neutral pH conditions, it precipitates out as a solid iron oxide, or as it's more commonly known, rust. Now, if something changes in the environment and that rusty iron oxide is exposed to anoxic conditions, it will be reduced back to its dissolved ionic form. So in the context of soil, depth matters, as the presence of oxygen dictates the operational fraction of iron that is present. And an important thing to note here is that the precipitated iron oxides possess a lot of surface area in addition to their positive charge, meaning that they're capable of binding anions like phosphate. And this is a well-established mechanism in temperate and tropical biomes, but not the Arctic. For some local relevancy, we actually see this mechanism occurring in the sediments of Lake Champlain. Next. So when you combine the phosphorus and iron cycles, this is the result. And what I want you to focus on here is the change from ferrous iron, Fe2, oxidizing to ferric iron, Fe3, and then its precipitation out into an iron oxide. Next. Which loves to bind available phosphate anions. Next. So now I want to explore some influential, oh, you're good, you can go next. So now I want to explore some influential figures and data that have propelled, oh, wait, back one. There we go, perfect. So previously we discussed how the thawing of permafrost will be increasing the delivery of nutrients and other solutes to low-lying areas and the freshwater systems that exist there. And in Michael Kendrick's 2018 paper, we see the evidence to support that theory, with significant increases here in nitrate, ammonium, and alkalinity in the Kuparuk River over the last 20 to 30 years. However, we actually see a significant decrease in total dissolved phosphorus over time. Next. So in 2019, Dr. Elizabeth Herndon set out to apply the well-documented iron and phosphorus relationship to the Arctic. First, she created a phosphate sorption index of soils from a variety of sites across the North Slope of Alaska. And phosphate sorption indices are a measure of how well soils absorb phosphate. And she found that the soils from Toolik Field Station had the highest phosphate sorption index values out of all soils in her study. She also found that Toolik soils had the highest short-range ordered iron oxide concentration, which I'll cover in the next slide. Next. So to explore this relationship a little further, Dr. Herndon also looked at the iron and phosphorus available in the soil. She created a hillslope transect, including an upland tussock tundra site, a hillslope heath site, and a low-lying wet sedge site. She found that the low-lying wet sedge sites had the highest amount of extractable iron, and that the largest portion of that extractable iron was present in the form of short-range ordered iron oxides. And in this case, short-range order, although it's intimidating, just refers to the regular predictable arrangement of iron atoms in a poorly crystalline form. And poorly crystalline just means there's ample surface area available in the mineral to bind anions, like phosphate. Next. So when she looked at phosphorus along the same transect, she found that nearly half of the extracted inorganic phosphorus was bound to an iron oxide. And this iron oxide bound P represents a unique nutrient sink or source depending on the redox conditions. As we discussed before, if an iron oxide is exposed to anoxic conditions within the environment, it will reduce to its soluble ionic form and it'll release any of the adsorbed anions that it once held. Next. So that leaves us with a few prominent questions. Primarily, where is the phosphorus, and why aren't we seeing it increase in the Kuparic River as we would expect? Second, how is the unique hydrology of the tundra influencing this abiotic relationship? Is the movement of water dictating where nutrient sinks may be forming on the landscape? And lastly, can we locate these nutrient sinks, which serves to examine the role of spatiality and soil depth? Next. Now, this is where my project comes in, as my goal is to understand how abiotic sorption may be controlling nutrient supply to freshwater ecosystems, and the outcome of my work will elucidate the relationship between iron oxides and soil phosphate concentrations within organic and mineral soils, but particularly within the hydrologically active areas of the tundra landscape. Next. Perfect. I will be conducting my study on the Kuparic River, the same river where Michael Kendrick found a significant decline in total dissolved phosphorus, and directly adjacent to the Tulik Field Station watershed, where Dr. Elizabeth Herndon conducted her iron and phosphorus work. Next. I've decided to focus on the hydrologically active areas of the watershed, or better said, where the water moves through the landscape. So I've selected 5 distinct land features, starting with water tracts or ephemeral tributaries, which are areas of accrued upland soil moisture on hill slopes, also referred to as tiger stripes. Second are toe slopes, which exist where a hill slope intersects a river valley. The abrupt topographical change results in the upwelling of groundwater and its associated solutes. Next. Third are wet sedge meadows, which are arguably the most important due to their near constant saturation and their visual abundance of iron oxides. And as we saw in Elizabeth Herndon's work, they have great potential to bind phosphate. Next. Fourth, we have stream banks, which represent the final terrestrial barrier before the deposition of lateral groundwater flow into the Kuparic. Next. And lastly, the control sites for this experiment will be the tussock tundra, which differs from all the aforementioned sites in terms of soil moisture content, pH, organic layer thickness, and topographic position. The tussock tundra is also the most abundant vegetation class on the north slope of Alaska. Next. So I've decided to split my project plan into 2 yearly timelines. In the first year, I've identified 10 total sites representing the 5 distinct land feature types within the Kuparic watershed. I've collected triplicate soil core samples from the organic layer at each site, and I'm currently in the process of determining the phosphate sorption capability of each site, creating a phosphate sorption index similar to the one you saw earlier from the Herndon 2019 paper. Based on the data from year 1, I will be revisiting the most promising sites to collect deeper soil cores, including both the organic and mineral soil layers. I will then perform iron and phosphorus fractionation analysis to determine the respective forms of the minerals and their concentrations. And using that data, I will likely be able to determine the extent to which iron may be controlling phosphorus availability within this Arctic watershed. Next. And I see I'm running low on time. So here are my hypotheses for the project. I'm not going to read them all out because I don't have the time for that. But if you want to go to the next slide, Kenna. So briefly, why is this all important? Well, the decline in phosphorus in the Kuparic River contradicts what we expect to see from permafrost thaw and the deepening of groundwater flow paths, especially when there are significant increases in other important solutes. Abiotic components of the phosphorus cycle are not negligible and are actually crucially important to the way this nutrient moves through the ecosystem. The unique hydrology of the tundra may be dictating where these potential iron and phosphorus nutrient sinks occur. And lastly, the introduction of phosphorus to low productivity Arctic freshwater systems could cause drastic changes. Previous artificial fertilization experiments on the Kuparic River have shown that even a small amount of phosphate addition can cause dramatic trophic shifts. Next. Here are the references used in this presentation. Next. And now I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Give it up for Will. You have 1 second left. So again, just nailing it with the time. We have 3 minutes for questions. If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand, type it in the chat.
Thanks for your patience, Will, and the audience. The technological lag seems to be accumulating over time.
No problem. The beauty of remote.
I have my hand up.
Yes, please continue.
It's Beverly. Hi, Will. That was a really interesting presentation. I think the answer to my question was in your presentation, but I was getting a little bit distracted by the slow advancing. Can you just run by me again the implications of flow paths? Like, I'm curious how these mechanics differ if you've got shallow channelized flow that's running through one of these, I forget what exactly you called them, water tracks, versus groundwater upwelling? Like, how do those kind of end members on the hydrology end influence the dynamics?
Sure. So the core theme of this is really permafrost thaw, and permafrost is thawing from the top down, which means that the groundwater is now infiltrating deeper layers of the soil. So there's this rich mineral soil that has previously been unavailable to the environment, and now the groundwater is beginning to interact with it and move solutes down the landscape towards these low-lying areas via the mechanism of upland leaching. So the idea behind my project is to spatially identify where these potential nutrient sinks as iron and phosphorus move towards the same location, where they're occurring on the landscape. And I think it all links back to the movement of water, and then including depth within the soil, so the organic and mineral layers. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. That's really interesting. It's a neat project.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Is your advisor going to ask you a question, or maybe he already has asked you all of them?
Guess not.
He's answering all of my questions.
All right, well, let's give it up for Will. Thanks, Will. All right, so as a reminder, this is being recorded. You're in session 1, and if you would like to transition to session 2, there will be a link posted again in the chat, or you can use the QR code. All right, we are going to be moving right along. Next up is Lily Howell. Lily is originally from Nashville and received her bachelor's in environment and sustainability from the University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee. She is currently in the dual master's program with Vermont Law School. After spending a year in South Royalton studying environmental law and policy, she is very excited to be at the Rubenstein School, where she can spend more time outside learning in the field. Her research will focus on how to create a new model for wildlands conservation that is both informed by and for the benefit of Vermont's Indigenous communities. And if Lily could be any animal for a day, she would be a barred owl, so she could nest in a tree all day, make cool hooting sounds, and have night vision. All right, so let's welcome Lily, and Lily in the chat will be your time reminder. So if you want to just keep that open so you can know where we're at, but welcome, Lily.
All right, thanks, Lucy. So yeah, my name is Lily Howell, and as Lucy mentioned, I am in the dual master's program with Vermont Law School. My project at this point is in its very beginning phases, and so I just look forward to hearing your initial thoughts and questions. So as Lucy said, my project is about wilderness and the role of Indigenous communities in the conservation of those landscapes. So we can go to the next slide. So I wanted to start out by showing this map just to orient us to the different types of conservation that we have here in the state of Vermont. This map is pretty old, it's from 1999, but even so, it just gives you all a flavor of some of the different scales at which conservation is happening here. There are federal, state, municipal, and private lands that are conserved in the state, which is pretty cool. In my project, I'm specifically going to be focusing on private land conservation and specifically conservation done by land trusts and other conservation organizations. In addition to the different scales at which it's happening, there are also many different purposes for conserving land. It's not all the same. There's land protected for agricultural or working forest reasons. There's land protected for recreational use, for wildlife corridors, and also wildlands or wilderness. And I'm using those terms pretty interchangeably in this presentation. So while I am focusing on wilderness in this project, I did want to say that all of these different conservation types are important. We need all of them. They're all serving different roles in the state, and there's not one that's better than the other. They're all working together to create something really great and a great place for us to live. So we can go to the next slide. So I think it's really interesting to try and define wilderness. There are a lot of different definitions out there. I just took this one definition from the Wilderness Act, which is the federal law that created wilderness in the United States. And some of you might have read this or seen this language before, but I've bolded some of the main concepts. Wilderness is supposed to be untrammeled by man. Man is a visitor. There are no permanent improvements or human habitation. It's preserved in natural conditions, things like that. We're all very familiar with this concept. And wildlands it can look really different depending on who's doing the conservation. But generally, there's no commercial use of the land, no extraction really of any kind. Some places don't allow any sort of mechanized or motorized recreation. So it kind of varies, but generally it's thought of as being a very stringent form of land protection. So when we're thinking about this concept and where it comes from, it really makes a lot of sense in our sort of Western Eurocentric American cultural context, because we've had such a massive impact on land as humans. There's not, an inch of the earth that hasn't been impacted by us in some way. And so it would make sense that we would want to set aside some areas where, humans are just a visitor, where we're not really supposed to be there. We're not managing the landscape at all. It's just sort of allowed to exist for its own sake. And so I just wanted to say that, that concept makes sense in our point of view, and it's not, a bad concept. I just think that there are other ways of understanding it, other ways of understanding the world. So I'll talk about that more in a moment, but we can move on to the next slide. So before I talk about my project, I wanted to connect this idea of wilderness to the bigger picture, because when I think about wilderness, a lot of times I think about large tracts of land out west or in Alaska, and I don't necessarily think about New England automatically. But this initiative called Wildlands and Woodlands has been endorsed and adopted by a lot of conservation organizations in the region. And what they're calling for in this vision is that by 2060, 70% of New England will be protected as forest. 7% additionally will be protected for agricultural use. And within the 70% of protected forest, a tenth of that will be managed as a wildland. So that's about 7% of New England. And if you do the math, that's roughly 2.5 to 3 million acres of land protected as wilderness. That's a lot of land. It's definitely something that we should be thinking about and thinking about critically as we're conducting this work and thinking about the future of the region. Next, please. So kind of the main question that I'm asking in my project is, what steps need to be taken by the conservation community to decolonize wilderness? And what I mean by that is, I think right now the conservation community is really reckoning with its past. As many of you know, the history of the conservation movement in the United States is not always a pretty picture, and there's certainly some roots in racism and white supremacy that we're all sort of dealing with and figuring out how to reckon with. And I'm seeing a lot of great conversations about how to diversify staff and board members, how to make sure that more people are getting access to conserved lands. All of those efforts are very important. But I also think we could dig a little bit deeper, and we could look at our values and our cultural frameworks in the way that we're viewing ourselves and our relationship to land, and ask, are these concepts inclusive of all people, and where are they coming from? So I think wilderness is an area that could use a little bit of attention, because as I've already mentioned, our current definition is really rooted in a Western Eurocentric perspective that says, we're not a part of nature. We're the managers of nature, and we're going to manage these areas over here, and we're not going to manage these areas over here. And as I said, that makes sense for us, but from what I've learned about the Indigenous perspective, they view themselves in a totally different cultural context. They see themselves as a vital part of the landscape that's not only equal to other members of the ecosystem, but in fact, as humans, they believe that we're a very young species that has a lot to learn from the other species that are here. So that's a totally different way of thinking about ourselves as humans. And additionally, they believe that they have a sacred responsibility to be in relationship with other species. So to kind of fence off land and set it aside is really counter to Indigenous spirituality and culture. and way of life. So I think these are really important things to consider. And I also think that we also have to recognize a lot of wilderness in the United States was created by removing Indigenous people from the land. So these are all really important things to be thinking about. And so my question is, where do we go from here, and how can we create a new type of wilderness that doesn't necessarily have to totally replace what we're already doing? But I think we can create something new that preserves some of the conventional concepts of wilderness, but is really guided by Indigenous communities and for their benefit. So we can move on to the next slide. So I have two main goals in my project. The first is to create opportunities for cultural healing and reparations. I was watching a webinar a couple weeks ago with Don Stevens, who's the chief of the Nulhegan Abenaki tribe. And what he was talking about was that as a people, what they really need is access to land, because their identity is so intertwined with the land itself that they can't really be who they are as a people without land. So I think that opening up this possibility of a new type of wilderness where Indigenous people are the center of it, I think that it can really be a chance to give back to communities from whom so much has been taken. And my second goal is to uplift traditional ecological knowledge. As we all know here, we're dealing with some pretty big environmental challenges, and I really believe that if we're going to have any hope of tackling any of them, we have to respect and uplift and listen to the very vast stores of wisdom and knowledge that are held in Indigenous communities around the world. And we have some of those communities here in Vermont. So I really think we have a responsibility to lift up and respect them and recognize that it can really serve to benefit all people. And we can go on to the next. So for my project, I'm proposing 3 different parts. The first is literature review, where I'm going to be doing a lot of research looking at historic information, but also conducting as many interviews as I can with contemporary, mostly Abenaki people, because I believe it's important to involve those communities early and talk to them as often as possible. My second sort of component would be to create a template conservation easement. Right now, a lot of private wilderness conservation is done using something called a Forever Wild easement, and it's just a template that sets out the kind of general guidelines for wilderness that's then tailored to fit every individual project. So I want to create something similar to that, that's just a really practical document that can be used by land trusts, that just spells all of this out in a legal context, and what does it look like legally on a piece of paper. And then finally, I want to create a list of action steps. As I said, I want this to be a very practical project that can be used by land trusts. And so I want to just create something very tangible where anyone could pick it up and have a list of steps that can be taken, identifying community partners and people to work with, identifying areas where action can be taken, things like that. So that is all I have, and I think I'm done a little bit early, so we have some time for questions.
Wonderful, Lily. Well, thank you for giving us an overview of what you hope to be doing during your time here. We already have a question. We have a hand raised. That was, can't always see the participants. That was Thomas McHenry. Please unmute and share your question.
Sure. Well, Lily's probably terrified because her dean is parachuted in to watch her presentation. So hi, Lily. I'm the dean at Vermont Law School, but great presentation. And hearing the earlier, more scientifically based presentations, all I could think of and mention to Nancy is how useful it is for our law and policy students to have more exposure to science and vice versa. So love to have that happen. So Lily, a couple of really quick thoughts. History of the national parks in the United States is very much a history of the exclusion of Native Americans, and that's an interesting subject to look at. You could probably find that in literature. Secondly, there's a great book called by Calvin Martin called Keepers of the Game, about Native American relationships with wildlife, that I'll send you the Amazon link to. I see you can, it's out of print, but you can get used copies for $5 or from your local library. And then on the subject of conservation easements, Jessica J teaches a summer course on conservation easements, and John Echevarria is a national expert on conservation easements on our faculty. those would be two people worth talking to, as well as the Vermont Land Trust, on ideas about sort of human usage in the conservation easement context. So all worth looking at. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean McHenry.
Thank you, Thomas. Does anyone else have a question for Lily? Yes, please, Breck.
Lily, this is really important work that you're doing here, and you may have said this, and I just missed it. But is the idea that this template for conservation easement that you're imagining would automatically incorporate Abenaki and Indigenous views, understanding, or knowledge? Is that an objective?
Yeah, so I imagine that the language of that easement would be very much informed by what I learned from the contemporary Abenaki people that I speak with. I think I'm really interested in hearing their perspective on so many things. I mean, even the word manage, which we use a lot when we're talking about land management, I don't really think that is how they view their relationship to the land. It's more of a relationship. So even, just words, I think, are something I'm really interested in learning about, and how can we be better with our language. But yes, you're absolutely right. I want to incorporate their way of seeing the world into this wilderness context.
That's outstanding. Yeah, thank you.
All right, Lily. Well, let's give Lily a hand. We will move right along. So soon we are in session 1, and if you would like to switch to session 2, you will see a link posted in the chat. This is our last presentation. As a reminder, that is my timer, you are being recorded. So here we are with our last presentation. Okay, we have Tori Helwig, and her name is Victoria, and she speaks for the bees. Victoria, aka Tori, is in the final leg of her dual degree master's program with Vermont Law School and UVM. After becoming proficient in key laws and policies related to natural resource management, Tori is putting her MELP and horticultural background to good use, exploring wild bumblebee habitat enhancement in Burlington. Her passion for pollinators grows daily with her master's project as she learns more about Bombus SPP, I'm not sure what that's supposed to say, and works with other activists in the area. Tori would be a finch if she could spend the day as any animal so that she could sing well and have a killer beak to crack open nuts. And Tori, I will be putting your time warnings in the chat if you want to keep that open. And help me welcome.
Thank you, Lucy, for that introduction. Thank you, Kenna, for being the tech, and thank you for everyone to stick around to the final presentation of today's symposium. So without further ado, I'll speak briefly about my research project related to fostering resilient urban habitat for wild bumblebees. And the next slide would be great. A brief overview of what I'll be talking about tonight. I'll start with the background of what got me involved in this area, provide you with my opportunity statement, the context of my research with the literature, my methodology, deliverables. I will conclude and offer an opportunity for questions. Next slide. So why I chose bumblebees. They are native to North America. There's a lot of energy and time spent on honeybee conservation, but bumblebees are native to North America and Vermont specifically. There are some federally recognized bumblebees, such as the rusty patch bumblebee, as an endangered species, and there are other declining species in Vermont. It's hard to deny their cuteness factor. They're easily identifiable. They are some of the earliest and latest pollinators in our region. They're a generalist species, and their different length tongues and ability to buzz pollinate makes them strong pollinators and helps a lot of plants reproduce. I've also spent a lot of time around them at my flower farming job down in Charlotte, so I've grown pretty fond of them. And next slide. There's a lot of people moving to urban areas, which provides a great opportunity to manage public and private lands for pollinator habitat enhancement. The Burlington Open Space Protection Plan, written in 2000 and updated in 2014, explicitly values the conservation of natural areas and open space in Burlington for wildlife habitat enhancement. So I see this as an opportunity to promote the spirit of Burlington as a city. And Burlington was also designated a bee city in 2019, which requires the maintenance of progress related to general commitments, raising awareness, enhancing habitat, and recognizing achievements publicly. Next slide. So with this designation and commitment to making annual progress, I saw this as a opportunity to support and explore this designation through the consideration of place meetings related to pollinator advocacy. And as a side note, UVM is also a bee campus, so they're committed to the same things. Next slide. Through my background reading up until this point, I've identified key themes in the literature. Where most of us are aware of the negative anthropological stressors on bumblebees and other pollinators, such as the overuse of pesticides and neonicotinoids, the loss of habitat, and the spread of disease through cultivated bees. There's also explicit ecological and economic benefits of the pollination services provided by bumblebees and other pollinators. But there's less in the way of specific individual place-based advocate values and motivations and social place meetings involved in certain places around urban areas. Next slide. So the questions guiding my project and research: what motivates individuals in Burlington to get involved in this kind of work? What do they value about it? And what do certain places mean in relation to these motivations? Next slide. The ultimate goals of my project are to fill the gap in the literature I've seen thus far in terms of assessing the understandings of pollinator habitat and conservation and the social and ecological meanings attached to certain places and advocacy work. And I'd love to support Bee City USA and contribute useful products to the initiative. Next slide. So for my project, I'll be working with the City of Burlington Parks and Rec Department and Vermont Master Naturalists, spearheaded in large part by Alicia Daniel, who some of you may have met through NR 206 if you were a teaching assistant. She's a very energetic and inspiring woman. And there's other students of hers through VMN and city officials through parks and other branches of Burlington that are excited about this work as well. And I'll be specifically working at Lakeview Cemetery. Alexandra Millar is a cemetery commissioner who approached me about enhancing pollinator habitat at the cemetery, and we're considering how to shift perceptions of cemeteries as urban green spaces. And I'll also be working at Champlain Elementary School with one of the head garden stewards who used to have a student there, a child of hers, but she's continued to take care of the gardens and wants to enhance pollinator habitat and outdoor field-based educational experiences for the students at that school. And at the center of my diagram is bumblebees because they're the star of the show. So next slide. Up until this point, I've been building my hive through the investigation of the historical context of this initiative and what other cities and campuses around the country have been up to. I've reviewed the literature on sense of place in urban areas and bumblebee ecology and tried to gear myself around thinking like a bee. I've participated in the structural formation of the Bee City Committee, and I've been establishing relationships through site visits to my 2 sites and conversations virtually with other potential partners. Next slide. Moving forward, I will continue with participant observation through committee meetings and interviews through the advocacy network, asking questions in 3 main categories around ecological understandings of pollinator habitat, social meetings attached to the specific places I'll be working, and others in urban natural areas, and what motivates advocates and what they value about conservation work on an individual and organizational level. Next slide. After my interview, I'll code for themes, identifying points of convergence and divergence, and challenges and opportunities moving forward, and some of the power dynamics in the relationships between individuals and organizations in this network. Next slide. When my project is done, I hope to contribute to Bee City USA generally, and produce a report on activist values and sense of place that Alicia Daniel and other activists in the Bee City USA committee can reference, as well as 2 demonstration plot designs and development plans for Lakeview and CES. Next slide. I'd like to thank my committee, Claire, Patricia, and Stephanie, for your invaluable advice and criticism and encouragement for my work thus far. And I really appreciate all your time. And I'd like to end, next slide, on a poem I got from Bern Heinrich's Bumblebee Ecology book that I thought was pretty cute and fitting for my work. And next slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Tori. That was wonderful. Let's give Tori. All right, and heading into 3 minutes of questions. So Thomas McHenry, please take it away.
Well, it'd be embarrassing if I didn't ask Tori a question, because she also has a Vermont Law School connection, but that was really fascinating. And my spouse has spent much of the summer taking photographs of insects and putting them on iNaturalist. And I'm sure you know all about that, but for anybody who doesn't, it's an extraordinarily powerful website that really helps you with insects. But my only question with bumblebees, which I knew so little about, is are they a keystone or indicator species? I mean, have you gone that far enough along to know what bumblebee populations can tell you about other things?
I don't know specifically as how they relate to indicator species, but I'm interested in how their social bees, and I was just interested to learn that most bees are solitary, and so I focused more on how they fit into that part of the ecology, less on how they're indicators generally.
Yeah, I certainly don't know, but I did keep honeybees for a little while, a long time ago in Los Angeles, and there was a huge problem with, I think, mites or nematodes or something that got into the honeybees, and it was tremendous impacts on crops and things like that. But clearly, from a pollination standpoint, they're really important, and it might be fun to sort of fit that in, because I think that helps tell the story, and it also gets people more, it brings in a level of engagement, which can be helpful.
True, and if anyone hasn't seen the most recent edition of the UVM magazine, they did a whole segment on pollination and disease spillover from cultivated colonies to wild, so it's worth the read. Thank you.
Any other questions as the other session comes in as well? Yes, Claire, please.
Tori, nice job. I wonder if you might just maybe, I don't know how much time you have left, maybe almost 0 minutes, but just sort of that contrast, a cemetery, a school. I mean, what's going on there?
A lot. I think it's really interesting, both ends of the spectrum, on developing young minds and the close of life, and places around the city that people might not consider traditionally as areas of habitat. So that's generally what I can say about that, but I'm interested to learn more.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, Tori. That concludes our presentation series. So thank you, everyone. Yay. Thanks, Kenna, for all your hard work. Thank you, audience. Thank you, presenters. Wish we could all be in person to celebrate. But I think this channel will stay open if people want to continue the conversation or have other questions, if people want to hang around.
Thanks, everybody.
Great job.
Hey, Lucy, this is Brock. I got my timing wrong and I missed Nancy's introduction. So if this is a duplication, I'm sorry. But I think you guys need to be complimented and a big pat on your back for pulling this off in these very difficult times that we're in right now. And so thank you to all of you who organized this and made it happen. And just a huge thanks to Carolyn, who supports graduate research and education so well for us. So thank you.
You did it.
It was a great bookend, Breck. Perfect.
It worked out wonderfully. I want to thank Kenna, Diana, Lucy, Eva, Caitlin, Maya, Emma, Anusha, Marcos, EJ, Will, Liam, Lily, Tessa, Tori, and Jess. You guys are awesome. Love you so much.
Great job.
Congratulations,
Great job, folks.
guys. Have a good weekend. Go have your glass of wine now.
Ooh, yeah.
All right, we'll see you.
Thanks, everybody. Oh, awesome. Mwah.